Hello and welcome to Heat Networks with Chirpy Heat. This is the podcast for housing providers tackling all things heat networks. In every episode, we hear from guests who bring along practical tips, guidance, and insights for heat network management, compliance, and technology. And this is all to help you run your heat networks efficiently and confidently. And today we have Sam Lawrenson with us, who is a heat network consultant at Chirpy Heat. Hello, Sam.
Hi, Christine. How are you?
I am good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, very well. Thank you for
Good.
having me.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming along. So, today we're going to be talking about Ofgem registration and Chirpy Heat's Ofgem registration service. Specifically, you've been leading on developing this service and you have been stuck right into the detail of all of this process for housing providers. So, yeah, it's going to be brilliant to hear some of your insights from what you've been learning recently. So, could we start with just a very simple question? What is Ofgem registration for heat networks?
Yes, what is registration? That is a question that I get asked a lot, to be honest with you. So essentially, in a sentence, it's a new regulatory requirement for all of those that are responsible for heat networks. So in 2025, the government released new heat network regulations. They were aimed at stimulating the sector, the growth of the sector, but also protecting consumers and bringing in consumer protections that are similar to those in the gas and electricity market. Um, the heat network registration is part of those wider regulations. So under the regulations, all existing heat networks, so the heat networks that are out there right now providing heat and hot water to consumers, they've been given what's called deemed authorization. And that essentially means that they're allowed to continue providing heat and hot water legally, so they can do that within the realms of the legislation. Any heat network that has been granted deemed authorization is subject to what's called the authorization conditions. Now, the authorization conditions, again, are something that's outlined in the legislation, but it's essentially a list of rules that scope out how heat networks should be managed. So they cover all sorts of different areas like billing, complaints, vulnerable customers, that sort of thing. Registering your heat networks is one of those authorization conditions, so it has to be done to be able to continue providing heat and hot water. You have to register your heat networks with Ofgem, who have been put in place as a new regulator for the heat network sector. That's something that they've done previously in the gas and electricity markets, but it is new for them in the heat network sector. And so, yeah, they will be the regulator. They will oversee the deemed authorization, all of these heat networks, and making sure that they're compliant with the authorization conditions. Ofgem have developed loads of processes and support and systems and all of this sort of stuff to help with that heat network registration process. There's an online tool that you can now access to register your heat networks. That went live in April earlier this year. And so, yeah, housing associations can go to Ofgem's website, find that tool, get registered, and get their heat networks compliant. All of that work has to be done by the 27th of January, 2027. So next
Mm,
January. So
yes.
that's it in a nutshell.
That's brilliant. Yeah, very concise. Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, I was going to ask you about the deadline. I'm sure that's a big question as well. Yeah, it seems like a long time away, doesn't it, when you talk about 2027? But for
Yeah, I
housing
think
providers, yeah, perhaps it's not when you start thinking about all the things that need to be done. But let's move on to that. So where would they actually start with all these things that they need to be doing?
yeah. So like you sort of touched on, there's a lot to do on this. I think some of the conversations I've been having with clients, they see the communications on heat network registration and they think it's just that bit, the actual registering, getting your heat network information to the regulator, when in matter of fact, there's actually a multi-stage process that has to be followed. There's a lot of different steps that have got to be completed, and that involves things like identifying key stakeholders, developing policies and processes, and getting those signed off at board level in some cases, and also validating loads of different data streams. Um, what we've done at Chirpy is sort of pulled out 5 key areas that we think housing providers and local authorities, anybody that's got a heat network, should be thinking about and considering and starting to take action on now to make sure that they can hit those deadlines. So I'll just run through some of those if that's okay.
Mm.
The first one will be identifying the regulatory contact. So the regulatory contact is a role that is defined within legislation. Ofgem, the regulator, defined this role as the most senior person with responsibility for heat networks in an organisation. This regulatory contact is seen as the main point of contact from a regulatory perspective for Ofgem. So in case of any compliance or regulatory issues, that is who they will go to. This regulatory contact is also responsible for starting the registration process. So they need to contact Ofgem, say to them, look, I'm the regulatory contact, please set up my account. Ofgem will then be able to go away and create that account in the online system that I already mentioned. So the organisation can then begin adding information. The regulatory contact is also responsible for submitting that information at the end. So they might not necessarily have to add all of that information themselves. If it's a large organisation, this is often not the case. But they will ultimately have to take responsibility for it and submit that to the regulator and say that it is accurate as far as they're aware. So we're recommending that people start trying to identify who this regulatory contact is as soon as possible, especially in large organizations. It can be quite challenging and time consuming to identify who this person is. Often, so what I should say is that this role will generally be at executive or director level, and often this person isn't close to the regulations or heat networks on a day-to-day basis, and so they might not be aware of the recent changes to regs and what will be expected of them. And so often there's a training and education piece that has to happen there to help them understand what is actually going to be required of them before they feel confident and comfortable enough to actually get that account set up. So that's the first point that we always stress. That can be a blocker before you've even started your registration process, because
Yeah.
you need to be able to identify that person to get your account.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is confirming your organisation details. So in the registration process, once you have that account set up with your regulatory contact, you'll then be able to log in. Ofgem will request organisation level information from you. In most cases, or in a lot of cases, this should be relatively straightforward, comparatively speaking to the rest of the stages. Where it can get a bit complicated is if you have heat networks that are owned or managed by interesting ownership structures, I should say. So things like ESCOs, joint ventures,
Right.
SPVs, that sort of stuff. The rules and regulations around those sort of networks are slightly different. So if you do have those sort of networks, you have to provide additional information relating to the financial viability. And so that will require a lot of data around value of assets, energy hedging, that sort of stuff. So when you get to this organization stage, having a very clear idea of what your portfolio looks like, understanding if you have any heat networks that have complicated ownership structures is very important to making sure that you register the networks in the correct way. Once you have added that organization level information, you then move on to completing what's called an SMRI declaration. SMRI stands for Significant Managerial Responsibility or Influence. And again, that is a term that's defined in legislation. What it essentially means is those in positions of responsibility relating to heat networks. So within the overarching regulations, there's a requirement of those that are responsible for heat networks to make sure that people that are running the heat networks, so those in positions of responsibility or SMRI, meet a certain level of certain standard of conduct and behaviours. And so this is to basically protect consumers. As you'll know, heat networks are a monopoly, and so what Ofgem, the regulator, want to do is ensure that those that are running those, the staff that are running those heat networks, are doing it with integrity and honesty and protecting the consumers and not putting them at risk of anything.
Yeah.
So this SMRI declaration, this has to be completed at registration stage. Like I say, it's an authorization condition. So there's authorization conditions I mentioned before. You have to be able to continue delivering heat and hot water, and make sure that anybody in a position of responsibility meets this fit and proper standard. So at the registration stage, you have to confirm that those in positions of responsibility meet this standard, and you do that by completing a declaration form. You also have to confirm that you have a register of people in positions of responsibility in place and a process to ensure that those people in positions of responsibility meet the fit and proper standard, and remain at the fit and proper standard on an ongoing basis. So this
This is
process,
only stage 3, yeah,
stage
just
3,
to
yeah,
point out.
yeah,
This is
yeah,
so much more than just uploading some data then. Right, okay.
absolutely. What I would say is that there's a lot of information there. This process is probably very new to housing associations, local authorities, or anybody in the social housing sector. It's something that has existed in the gas and electricity markets for quite a while, and it's quite similar to the responsible person role that some HAs might have in place for building safety
Right,
legislation.
okay.
But yeah, so this will require organisations to develop this, identify the people across the business. In larger organisations, this could be, across multiple departments or even multiple businesses within that larger organisation. They will need to develop a register that will need to be signed off at an appropriate level within their business, and then you'll need to identify a resource and a process to actually deliver the ongoing compliance and confirm that. So that is quite a big task. We expect, and our experience from speaking to clients is that there's not very much experience of this, and not many clients have ever done anything like this before, and so it's requiring them to go away, speak to senior management, produce papers, and send those to board for approval before the processes can be put in place.
Yeah.
So very time consuming, and I think a really big sticking point for a lot of HAs.
And associations, to be clear.
Sorry,
That's okay.
housing associations. So that's the SMRI declaration. Once you have completed that stage in your Ofgem process, at that point you can actually begin uploading heat network data into the system, which always makes me smile. You think of the Ofgem registration, you think, oh, I'll get my information uploaded, but you've got so much to do there before you can even think about uploading an address into the system. But the next
Are
stage,
you smiling because like so much will have been organised when you get to that point,
yeah,
and it just
that's
makes you
exactly.
happy?
Yeah. But yeah, so at this point you can start uploading your data into the system. So our recommendation at this stage 4, is to validate your data. So the registration process will require around 30 data points for each heat network in your portfolio. This very much depends on the type of heat network and the nature of it. So whether it's metered, unmetered, the size of it, whether it's a communal or a district heat network, all of these sort of things will affect the amount of information that Ofgem will request, but generally around 30 data points. These 30 data points cover all sorts of different areas. So information around billing, information around metering setups on the heat network, a confirmation of vulnerable customer processes in place. You have to provide technical and asset information. Lots of different stuff, often cuts across multiple different departments in a HA. And in some cases, those data points might not even exist or be easily accessible, and will require visiting site to actually confirm what they are. So our recommendation for that fourth stage, or that fourth recommendation, is about starting to have a look at your data as soon as possible, understanding where the gaps might be, understanding who the key parties are, the key teams that you need to speak to. And yeah, having those conversations as early as possible, outlining responsibilities and deadlines, and making sure that everything will be ready for when it comes time to actually upload it to Ofgem's system. The final point of our 5 is to make sure that you meet those deadlines. I did sort of touch on it earlier, but the deadline for completing Ofgem's registration is the 26th of Jan next year, which might sound like quite a while away, but in reality, it's not. If you've got to complete internal training, identify stakeholders, develop and sign off processes, validate and collate data, that can be quite a lot of work to do depending on your heat network portfolio and your current position. So we encourage people to start as soon as possible, basically.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to recap actually just before we move on. So there were 5 points. First was identifying your regulatory contact, adding your organisation details to the Ofgem portal, completing your SMRI declaration,
Yep.
validating your data, and then obviously submitting before the deadline. Perfect.
That's it.
Okay. It sounds nice and simple when I just put it in a neat list like that. But as you have pointed out, there's a lot to do. Okay, so could we move on to how can Chirpy Heat help with this process then for housing providers?
Yep, absolutely. So obviously we've been doing a lot of work on the registration process. Our clients are coming to us and asking us for support. So we've got right into the thick of all of the guidance and the consultation documents, all of this sort of stuff to really understand where the gaps are for our clients, where the gaps are for HAs and LAs, and what we can do to support them. And so yeah, we have a suite of registration services that we developed as a business, and those services all sort of touch on the 5 points that I mentioned previously, and hopefully will provide clients with the sort of solutions they need to just get their registration finalized and reduce any sort of delays that could crop up. So we offer an end-to-end service for clients that want that level of support. So we can go all the way from that initial identification of your regulatory contact right through to submitting Ofgem, your actual registration return to Ofgem. We can do all of that on your behalf, obviously in support with various stakeholders internally, but we are able to support you with all of that. And then again, for clients that might want a little bit more bespoke support, or they're having challenges with a specific aspect of the registration process, then we can also provide that as well. So yeah, like I say, the services that we've developed sort of align with those 5 points that we've already talked through. So I'll very quickly go through those now, if that's all right.
Yeah, please do.
So first thing is training. We offer a training service, and that is meant to support those that are right at the front end of this journey. And basically your clients will be able to invite all of their key stakeholders to an online session where we run through exactly what's required under registration and what that means for the client. And so off the back of that, anybody that does a training session will receive an action plan with key next steps that will outline exactly what's required to progress your registration. I think one of the key points to mention about that training is it's really good if you are still trying to identify and put in place your regulatory contact. You're able to invite the personal persons who you think that might be, and we will run through the training session with them and explain to them what their responsibilities are, and it'll put them in the perfect position to say, yes, I'm happy to do this, and give the go ahead to progress. So that removes that blocker entirely, which we think is really good. The next service that we offer is services around the SMRI declaration. So we're calling it responsibility declaration support. Basically what we will do is we will support your organization with developing their SMRI register and process, and we will also work with key stakeholders to complete the declarations as required under the legislation. And so anybody that does take up that service will end up with a ready to go register, process document, and 2 completed declarations that can be sent to board or to senior management for approval and implementation straight away, which again removes that blocker entirely. The next service that we offer is something called a heat register. This is sort of focused towards those that might need a little bit more support with their data and maybe don't have very much data available. What we will do for this service is work with clients to identify all of the key data points that will be required under registration. We'll then pull all of that together into a single version of the truth, whilst identifying any gaps or any issues that we might have found whilst pulling the information together. And that single version of the truth, that baseline of information, can then be used by the organization to complete further validation before they submit it to Ofgem, and also to complete their notification to Ofgem themselves if they like. After that, we also have a data validation service, and so this is sort of probably more appropriate for organizations that have got a better grip on their data and have most of their data ready to go, but maybe don't have the level of confidence that they would like before submitting it to the regulator. And so this data validation service, consultants at Chirpy Heat will basically take your data and do an in-depth audit of it, identifying any anomalies, gaps, all of that sort of stuff. And then off the back of it, anybody that takes the service will get a written report which outlines where the gaps are and key recommendations to improve that data and get it to where it needs to be before it gets submitted to Ofgem. Really great service, I think, that one. Ofgem have said to us in webinars that there's no validation exercise completed on the information that goes in
Mm.
at registration. So the information that goes is correct as far as they're concerned, and no issues
Yeah.
would be picked up on until maybe a customer complaint or something further down the line. So I think the data validation side of things is really good to give you that confidence before things go to the regulator. And then the final service that we offer is the actual Ofgem submission itself. So that Ofgem submission, we can, if once you've provided us with access, go into the Ofgem tool and actually upload that information into the tool on your behalf, which removes what is quite an admin heavy process. Depending on the number of heat networks you have, it can take upwards of 20 minutes per heat network, and that's if you've got all of the information in front of you. So for those clients with lots and lots of heat networks, it could be quite time consuming.
Mm.
Another thing I should say on all of those services is they're all backed up by our newly developed online tool, Chirpy Nest. This is an online service that we've developed to support our clients with heat network registration, and it provides an online space where you can upload your information in the run-up to Ofgem registration and check it, validate it, all of that good stuff before, like I say, before it goes to Ofgem. So it gives you that central storage.
That's brilliant. Okay, thank you. So I guess just if thinking about it, like if there was no responsible individual, we're gonna SMRI in place, would that be a stumbling block? Could they still go through the rest of the process?
Yeah, so important to say actually that it is a sequential process. So Ofgem have advised us that you have to complete one step before moving on to the next. So organisations will have to identify their regulatory contact, complete their SMRI information, and complete their SMRI declarations and upload their organisation information before they can begin to add any information relating to heat networks. So making sure you get all of that stuff done at the front end is really important. If you just spend all of your time focusing on the data and making sure that's ready to go when it comes time to actually upload, you could end up with a couple of months delay
Yeah,
creating
yeah.
those processes for SMRI.
Okay, thank you very much. So it seems like with all these different stages that they need to go through, there's going to be quite a bit of time and resources they're going to have to put into registration. That's fair to say, right?
Yeah. I think, I mean, hopefully I've impressed upon you that there is a lot of work to do, and it's going to require a lot of time and resource dedicated to it. And that's not just the data collation, which I think will be a big piece of work, but that's also the engagement with all of the key stakeholders across the business. It's the development of the policies and processes that will need to be then signed off at potentially board level. All of this sort of stuff is going to take housing associations and local authorities potentially a very long time. And that's so our services sort of reflect that as well, which I think that's important to say. So all of the services that we talk through, they're all very much bespoke to your organization or an organization and its portfolio. And so the pricing and the way that we produce our services sort of that is reflected in that, right? So if you were to, let's say, for example, if a client was to go ahead with a data validation exercise, the way that we would confirm the scope of that service and price it is based on that client's portfolio and how much support they will need with that specific task.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Thank you very much. And yeah, I guess finally, why would people be coming to Chirpy Heat for this? Why Chirpy Heat?
Well, I think beyond the obvious reason, which is that they don't want to deal with the stress of it themselves,
Yep,
which I think
yep.
is a very good one. Um, Chirpy, Chirpy Heat as a business has been involved in this for a long time. We're we're heat network experts, but we're also registration experts. So we've been involved in heat network compliance and support for a very long time. But the registration side of things, since its inception, we've been involved going to Ofgem communications and webinars, all of that sort of thing, contributing to system testing. And so I think having all of that insight has put us in a really good place to support people. And we've experienced a lot of what can go wrong, and we can use that information to help support our clients, which I think is really important. Another reason to use Chirpy Heat, I think, and I sort of touched on this with the data validation, but using our services will really give you that confidence in your compliance. So like I say, Ofgem won't be doing any in-depth data checks at the point of registration. Any incorrect data or any issues with the data would potentially only be identified if a customer puts in a complaint, and Ofgem does in further checks and assurances. And so going with Chirpy and getting them to support with some of the the registration processes, I think, can really give you that confidence in your data and put you in a position where you can say to board or exec that this is the information, these are the checks we've done on it, this is why we're confident that it's correct. And doing that reduces the likelihood of like more challenging conversations that might come up with Ofgem later down the line in case of any complaints or queries. And I think maybe the final thing to say is that we're social housing experts as well. So outside of being very familiar with the registration, we understand what that means for social housing providers, housing associations, and local authorities. And in reality, what that will mean for them. So whilst Ofgem might say that a process is very simple and you just have to identify a couple of people, we know the realities of housing associations, how they're structured, the challenges around getting new policies and processes delivered at times, all that sort of stuff. And so we can help tailor our services to support those challenges.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you so much for running through all that. We have covered a lot. I'm just going to quickly recap. So we've gone through what Ofgem registration actually is and what it involves. We've talked a bit about the deadline, so January 2027. That's a big one to remember. I feel like that needs to be ingrained in our minds somewhere, especially when we're thinking about getting started. Ideally, I suppose now. Now would be the time. But we've also talked about how to get started. So we talked about the 5 different stages of registration. We've talked about how Chirpy Heat can support with registration, and that is split up into 5 separate services as well. And so I will actually recap those. So we've got training, the SMRI process identification. We've got the heat network register, data validation, and finally the actual uploading to the portal. Brilliant. Okay, good. And in terms of if people want to find out any more about this from Chirpy Heat, then they can either email client.relationships@chirpyheat.com, or you can just search for Chirpy Heat and Ofgem registration, and that will take you to our website where you can find out lots more information and get in touch with us. Thank you so much for coming along and bringing all these expertise with you. I think this has been a really, really valuable conversation. There's so much detail here that, just to have all this information in one person, because you've been leading on this service, and you've been talking to the heat networks, you've been talking to Ofgem. So I think it's brilliant that we've been able to just talk through all that today. So thank you again.
No, Christine.
Okay, right. Well, we'll leave it there, and take care, everyone. See you next time.